Got it. Great.
Excellent.
Okay,
So
good.
after 12, everybody, good to see. Just kidding. Should have waited till the recording was on. No, we're happy to be back with Dr. Michal Raucher for our second session, our bioethics initiative on abortion in the Jewish community. And you've already heard more than you want from me, so let me turn it over to Dr. Raucher to begin our session. Thank you again for being with us.
Great, thanks. Thank you, Rabbi Peltz. It's wonderful to be here again, be with you all. I am really excited to share this data. As I said, so at the first session, I gave an overview of kind of what we know about people in the US who have had abortions. And I shared data that was culled from a lot of different research studies and research centers, and published data. And then I introduced just a little bit of the study that I launched over the summer with several other researchers. The study is titled Jews Who've Had Abortions in the United States. It is collecting a survey and interviews with people who've had abortions who identify as Jewish since 1973 in the United States. And today, I am going to share with you some of the preliminary data that we've collected. It's still in process, and the survey is still in progress. So I'm still processing what we've kind of collected so far. So it was great to have this opportunity to go through our preliminary data and see what we actually know. And also, I hope you will all keep in mind that what we're doing is still progressing. We're still collecting data, and so part of what I am really excited about doing with all of you tonight is thinking about what we still need to know. What are the questions that you have about about the data that we've collected? And that'll be helpful as we move into the next phase of data collection, expand our recruitment and think differently, maybe change the survey a little bit, link it with other questions. We'll have to see where this study goes. But that's why it's really exciting for me to share it with all of you tonight. So let me share my screen. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to be sharing this data tonight. Let me talk to you a little bit about the survey. I'm going to jump right in because there is so much exciting data. And at different points, I will be putting this in conversation with what we know about the general population. So you'll see that as we progress throughout the evening. And that'll also be an interesting observation for all of us. Okay, so we conducted a survey. We created a survey, rather, that has about 101 content questions. There's also a question about consent. Do you consent to participate? And there are a few wrap-up questions at the end, but the content questions, there are 101. And in there are eligibility questions. In other words, have you had an abortion in the United States? Do you identify as Jewish? Things like that. Demographics, your age, your income level, your political affiliation. I'll share some of that with you today. I'll set up our survey sample for all of you. Questions about how they were raised Jewishly. And for that, we're asking both what denomination you were raised in, if a denomination at all, but we're also asking things like, did you keep kosher at home growing up? How many times did you light candles? Weekly, monthly, just a couple times a year? How many times did you attend services? Things like that, so that we can gauge, how important is being Jewish in your life? Things like that, so that we can gauge not just the denominational affiliation, which sometimes means more, it means more to certain people than it does to other people, but also how much Judaism is a part of somebody's everyday life or weekly life. We believe that those kinds of questions are that kind of relationship to Judaism might be influential in how you decided to get an abortion, whether you felt shame about the abortion, things like that. So we're asking a lot of questions about that, and we're trying to figure out now, actually, one of the things we're doing with the data right now is trying to figure out whether we can make a kind of different scale for religiosity that isn't dependent on denominational affiliation. I'm happy to talk a little bit more about that at the next session, where we're going to talk about, what are we doing? Differences in Jewish affiliation affecting women's abortion. So that'll be really relevant next time. Then we ask a bunch of questions about the abortion. So gestational age at which you terminated, how old you were when you terminated, reasons, which we're going to get into tonight. Did you tell anybody about your abortion? How did you pay for the abortion? A lot of information that is all thought of to answer the kind of parallel questions that we know about the general population, which I shared a few weeks ago. We want to know whether they apply to Jews, to Jews as well. Then we ask several questions about their Jewish identity vis-a-vis the abortion. So for that one, we're asking things like, did you speak to a clergy member before, during, or after the abortion, either for permission, kind of Jewish legal permission, or some kind of pastoral care, or help finding where to get the abortion? Did you tell Jewish friends about the abortion? Did you do any rituals around the abortion? Things like that. And then finally, attitudes about abortion. So how do you moralize around abortion? Do you think abortion should be legal in all circumstances? Has your own abortion experience shaped your general attitudes about abortion? What informs your abortion experience, your attitudes towards abortion? Is it informed by Jewish law, Jewish values, feminism, secular ideas about justice? What's informing them? So that's the survey. So we conducted this whole survey that we first went through several rounds of testing with, both with a kind of control population and then with a population of people who've had an abortion, to iron out a lot of the kinks. That took about 8 months or so to come up with a survey that the whole team felt happy with. Then we started, the survey, also includes an invitation to be interviewed. So a large proportion of the people who have participated in the survey, who submitted the survey, have also volunteered to be interviewed. And for that, they gave us their contact information, which we quickly kind of separated from their survey data so that everything would be anonymous. And we proceeded to interview those who requested an interview. We received 170 total responses to the survey. For each question, the response range was somewhere around 164 to 170. Sometimes it was a little bit low. I should realize it was really 155. One or two questions is 155 to 170, which just means that everybody who completed the survey didn't answer every single question. We didn't force them to answer most questions except for the eligibility questions. So they could be going through and say, man, I don't really feel like answering that question, which ethically is something we have to do. Of the 170 people who submitted a survey, over 100 volunteered to be interviewed, and we were able to interview 99 or 100 of them. Yeah, so what you're seeing here in this presentation is going to be both a combination of the survey data and the qualitative material that we got from the interviews, which it gives a lot of color and depth to the survey responses. The research is approved by my institutional review board at Rutgers University. Okay, we circulated the survey from July 2023 until September 2023, through September 2023. We were planning on doing another push for the survey after the Chagim, after the high holidays. But then October 7th happened and we decided it was not the right time. So the Jewish community is preoccupied and that's totally fine. So we'll probably do another launch in a month or two to see if we can get some of the demographic areas that we haven't fully captured yet. So here's a list of all of the places that have circulated the survey for us. And there's a decent question about, and you'll see this when we look at the demographics of our respondents, have we kind of adequately sampled the Jewish community in a way that gets at the diversity of the community. We certainly have not hit certain demographic markers. So that's one of the areas that we're going to look into more in the coming months. Okay. Okay, so now let's go to demographics of our sample in particular. So from our sample, so I'm comparing our sample to recent, the recent Pew survey, Portrait of Jewish Americans from 2020. Pew collected data from interviews with 4,718 Jewish American adults from November 2019 until June 2020. And they gave us some demographic data. So on this slide and the next, we'll look at sort of how our sample compares. Our sample, remember, is much, much smaller. It is not meant to be representative. We cannot make any kind of claim from our sample like all Jewish women who have abortions say da 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 da, or a majority of Jewish women who have abortions. We can't even say that. What we could say is 50% of what you'll hear me say, 50% of Jewish women who completed our survey said da 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 da. So just so that we all remember the limitations of my survey in particular, I've included here what the N number is, the total number that is represented in these percentages. So you'll see our race and ethnicity categorization we have a comparable number of white participants in our survey to the general Jewish population. Pew says 92% of the Jewish population is white. 89% of our survey respondents are white. We seem to have very much oversampled among Ashkenazi Jews, so we need to rectify that. We have a comparable number of individuals who identify as straight between our survey and the general Jewish population. We have many more married individuals in ours. A larger percentage of our survey is married. 70% compared to the larger Jewish population is 59%. This might be corrected by age adjustments, or it could be that among people who've had abortions, more of them are married. I'm not entirely sure. That's a question left open for us. In our survey, 27% of participants had no children when they had an abortion, or no children at all when they submitted the survey. 52% have 1 to 2 children, and 21% have 3 to 5 children. Pew didn't collect this data in particular, how many people at the time of being interviewed had children, and how many children, but we know from Pew's data that in ages 40 to 59, an average have 1.9 children. So if we say that's 2 children, then we are somewhere around where our data is, which is the majority of people have about 2 children. Okay. A little more demographics. Again, comparing to Pew's survey of 4,700 individuals, we have many more participants. A larger percentage of our participants are from the Northeast. Some of that is a sampling bias. Our recruitment was more heavily in the Northeast. Even though all of these things are digital, we still found that some of these the organizations based in the Northeast gave us a larger sample. But compared to the Midwest, we had 13% in the Midwest. The Jewish population is about 10% in the Midwest, 22% in the South. So we're a little bit under where the general Jewish population is, and we're very much under where the general population is in the West. So we definitely need more sampling in the West and probably less in the Northeast. So that's another area that we're going to be addressing in the coming months. We also seem to have wildly oversampled people with postgraduate degrees. I'm not quite sure why that is. So 75% of our sample has postgraduate degrees compared to the general Jewish population of 28%. So again, something we're going to have to try to figure out. Political views, our sample leans more heavily Democrat than the larger Jewish population. Okay, let's move on. The age of our participants, what I've put here is also comparing our survey to a different survey. This one is to the American Jewish Population Project, which is based at Brandeis. Brandeis combined data from several other studies and published in 2020. And you'll see here that our sample has many fewer people in the 18 to 24 range. So we have to figure out how to reach them. We've reached out through Hillel, but obviously that's not sufficient. Our sample has a comparable number of 25 to 34-year-olds. The orange bar is the general Jewish population. The blue bar is our sample. Our sample has a much larger share of 35 to 44-year-olds. We're over 25%, whereas the general Jewish population is under 15%. We have fewer 45 to 54, and then the rest of the categories go on like that. Okay. I'm going through these slides a little bit quickly so that we can get to the reasons, but I wanted you all to kind of see who the people are that are in our survey. Okay, last slide about the general identity of our participants, some other demographic information. So we did, even though I said we're kind of trying to complicate religious identity in a way that isn't just denominational, so that we have a sense of somebody's full religious identity, not just a label. But nonetheless, because all of the other surveys do a lot of denominational identity, I'm showing you here how our survey compares to the general Jewish population. Here again, I have Pew Jewish Americans in the orange and our survey in the blue. So we have a slightly larger share of Orthodox participants in our survey than in the general Jewish population, which was actually surprising to me, I'll just say, because one of the things that we talk a lot about in our data collection among our team is that it seems like we don't have enough Orthodox participants. And we always have to remember that Orthodox Jews actually represent a minority of the Jewish population. They're under 10%. I think for many people, it seems like they're larger, I think, because they're louder and they're kind of better known or something like this. But actually, we have a good percentage of Orthodox participants if we want our sample to reflect the larger Jewish population. We have more conservative Jews in percentage-wise, but fewer Reform Jews. Again, some of this is kind of hard to tell because we did ask, this is based on people, how they grew up, how they were raised. How they identify currently is a little bit different, and I can talk about that. We do see some change over time, in particular between conservative and Reform. So I'm not too worried about these differences right here. The no branch and the other branch are kind of interesting. Other branch includes Reconstructionist Judaism, of which there is a small sample in the American population and a small percentage of our survey as well. The no branch includes people who identified in our survey as secular, cultural, just Jewish. And again, those types of things it might be that somebody never belonged to a synagogue, and so they don't identify with any movement, but they kept kosher or they celebrated holidays and they lit candles with their family. And so religiosity doesn't always mean just denomination. You all know this. Okay. Are there any questions before I move on to the abortion material? Yeah, Alvin. Can you unmute? There you go.
It seems to me if I had to do 102 questionnaire and I was told that before I started, I might say, no, thank you. That's just too many questions for me. So I'm wondering if you looked at that, how many people were asked to participate and turned it down for that very silly reason. I'll say silly because they volunteered to be part of a research study that comes with the territory. But I can understand that could be daunting, especially for a younger woman who may have some children hanging around and not much time for that.
It's a great question. And I was actually very nervous about the time that it took people to complete the survey. And we found that it was not as much time as we thought it was going to be. I asked when we were testing the survey, I said to people, okay, give yourself an hour. Tell me if it really takes that long. And our tester, I said, do it kind of as slowly as you would do it. Don't try to speed through it because I want to get kind of with the longest possible time it's going to take. And they told me 45 minutes, 50 minutes. And so we kept cutting down the survey, but I still felt very nervous about how long it was going to take. Turns out it was taking people like between 20 and 30 minutes to take the survey. We get that kind of data. That's not really a huge amount of time. we did see some drop off. I'll tell you, we saw two points of drop off. One, people realized they weren't eligible. A lot of people said, "Oh, I've had an abortion," and then I mentioned this, I think, a few weeks ago, because the definition of abortion is contested by a lot of people. We've defined abortion as the intentional interruption of a pregnancy, excluding miscarriage and ectopic pregnancy. A lot of people started filling out our survey and then realized they weren't eligible. I don't have those exact numbers, but it was at least another 35 people who realized they were not eligible, and we deleted those responses. So yeah, they couldn't fill out the rest of the survey. So that's the majority of it. We didn't get any people who started. We didn't get any people who started filling it out, got like halfway through and then stopped. So that's a really great sign. Also, I can say, you know, because I've done research on reproduction in the past, and people are very eager to share their reproduction stories. This is not like, once people are, oh, you want to listen to my reproduction story? I will tell you my reproduction story. So yeah, that's a good question. Yeah. Other questions, confusions? Okay. All right. So I'll move on to the next piece. Okay. So here's the data about abortions, about the people in our survey who've had abortions. What do we know about them? So about those abortions. So 79% of our sample had one abortion. The remaining 20% had 2 or 3 abortions. And I can talk a little bit about those as well. Okay, 49% of our sample was married at the time of the abortion. 38% was dating or engaged, and 13% were single. 66% had no children at the time of the abortion, and then 32% had 1 to 3 children, and 2% had 4 to 6 children. If you remember from last week or last time, the majority of the American population that has had abortions does have children, has at least one child, over 60%. Yeah, so our population is a little bit distinct so far in that most of our sample does not have any children at the time of the abortion, although most, by the time they submit the survey, have had children. And age, see, we have here the largest proportion of people at the age at which they had the abortion is 21 to 30, which is consistent with the general population as well. That's 44%. The next largest percentage is 31 to 40, again, consistent with the larger population. And then we have about 10% under 21 and 3% in the 41 to 50 range. So that is one of those areas that reflects the larger American population. And these are all Jewish women who've had abortions. Okay. Some notes on income at the time of the abortion. The vast majority of people in the U.S. who have abortions live at 2 times below the poverty level. So they're experiencing extreme poverty. Our survey still had a good percentage, between 35 and 40% was making less than $40,000 a year at the time of their abortion. And then the next largest was 40,000 to 70,000. So almost all of and then a small percentage. And then it's interesting that you then have this next largest number, just under 20% at their income is $220,000 or more. The reasons that somebody up here is having an abortion are often very different than the reasons that somebody down here is having an abortion. One of the things we have not done yet is a multivariable analysis, kind of comparing reasons with income to see how they plot against each other. That'll be something that'll develop. Maybe I'll be able to share some of that by the time we meet in April. But yeah, so But it is interesting to note that still the vast majority of people having abortions are making less than $70,000 a year among Jews in our survey. Again, remember from a few weeks ago, the vast majority, over 95% of abortions happen before 13 weeks. And we see a similar pattern here. We see, so we see here, this is percentage. Oh, the percentage should be over here. But we see here, you've got 10 to 15% at 10 to 12 weeks, 40% at 7 to 9 weeks. So that's 55% plus another 15%, 60%, 70% of abortions in our survey are happening before 12 weeks. And then the next largest chunk is 13 to 16 weeks. So clearly the vast majority are happening before 16 weeks. What we'll see later is that we seem to have oversampled people who had abortions because of fetal diagnoses, which occur later in the pregnancy. So that might explain why we seem to have a larger sample of people who have abortions later in their pregnancy than the general population, because I think we were very nervous we weren't going to catch those. So we recruited in some specific avenues to have those. Again, we don't know yet from our data. We don't know. And our small sample size won't tell us if the majority of Jews having abortions are having them for fetal diagnosis reasons. But we'll be able to see some things from our data nonetheless. Okay. So what do we know? So now I want to shift to the topic for the night, the reasons why people have abortions, reason why Jews are having abortions. So here's what we were thinking of as our first plot point, the reasons in the larger population for abortions. And for that, we have this gold standard study that has been cited so many times and used as, people have tried to replicate this data a lot. A study that was published in 2005, this is the citation here, by Larry Feiner, Lori Froworth, Lindsay Dauphin, and a few others from the Guttmacher Institute, titled Reasons U.S. Women Have Abortions, Quantitative and Qualitative Perspectives. So their research was conducted in 2004. They also did a structured survey that they handed out at 11 large abortion provider institutions. They were able to collect the survey from 1,209 abortion patients, 1,209 abortion patients. Of those abortion patients, they were able to do in-depth interviews with 38 women at 4 sites. And so from this, this is the kind of data that when we structured our survey, we were thinking, well, do the Jewish participants compare to this data? How do they compare? One of the things to know about those who participated in the interviews, and so the qualitative material that they're sharing, is that most of the people who participated in interviews were people who had terminated for medical reasons. And the reason they participated in interviews is because they often had to sit at the clinic for 2 days during the procedure. So they were more likely to participate in an interview with a member of the research staff. Whereas somebody coming in for an abortion because it wasn't the right time or earlier in the pregnancy wouldn't need to be in the office very long and might not want to participate in an interview. Okay, so what do we know from the Feiner et al. Article? So this, Feiner et al. Took their survey in 2004 and compared it to data that had been collected in 1987 on reasons U.S. women had abortions. They compared it to 1987 for a few important reasons. One is that the rate of abortions dropped from 1987 to 2004, and they were trying to figure out whether people were still having abortions for the same reason. Maybe there was one reason that was becoming obsolete by 2004, and that contributed to the drop. So what they found is that several of the reasons were identical or virtually identical on the 1987 surveys and the 2004 surveys. So what they found was this main category of having a baby would dramatically change my life. In 2004, 74% of their respondents, remember this large 1,100 participants, and 78% in 1987. That's similar enough for these researchers. Would interfere with education, 38%, would interfere with job or employment, career. Can you all see this? Is this too small or can you see it? You okay? If somebody tells me they can't see it, you'll let me know. Can't afford a baby right now is another big reason. So you see they've listed all of these reasons why people are having abortions from 2004. I'm going to highlight just the most common reasons among US women. So they said having a baby would dramatically change my life. I can't afford a baby, relationship problems, or to avoid single motherhood. They completed childbearing, interfere with education, interfere with employment. Health of fetus is 13% and their own health is 12%. Keep that number in mind because our number is very different. They then ask, because the first question they ask is select all the reasons that you're having an abortion, which is why you have these percentages that add up to more than 100. People could select as many as they want. Then they asked, what are the most important reasons among US women for abortions? This is from that same study. And they found not ready for another child, can't afford a baby, don't want a baby, and partner related. Those were the most popular top 4. We'll return to those in a minute when we get to the Jewish women. Okay, now, reasons Jewish women in the US have abortions. This is from our study. We had 165 respondents. Here again, we took those same options essentially and put them into this survey, and we allowed people to choose as many reasons as they wanted. And then the next question, we had them choose what's the number 1 reason from these that you've selected. So you'll see here, again, we have not financially prepared, wasn't the right time, partner-related reasons, this really interesting distribution, I wasn't emotionally or mentally prepared. Only 10% said I needed to focus on other children. Again, that might be because our sample seemed to have a smaller percentage of people who had children at the time of their abortion. But there might be other reasons for it also. I wasn't independent or mature enough. All of these are so interesting. I became pregnant as a result of rape and incest. These percentages are actually so low. Nobody in our survey said they became pregnant as a result of incest. 1 person said they became pregnant as a result of rape. So that does come up later. What are the most common reasons among Jewish women? Again, this is when they selected all of their reasons why they were having the abortion. It wasn't the right time. They weren't financially prepared. They were not emotionally or mentally prepared. It interfered with future opportunities, meaning a baby would interfere with future opportunities. Some partner-related reasons, they didn't want a baby, not mature or independent enough. Health-related concerns for fetus is 32%. This is much higher than that general population of 13%, and health-related concerns for self. Then we ask people to select their most important reason. I'm going to compare all of these in a minute. So don't worry about having to remember all of this data. Okay, the most important reasons, you'll see here some rise right to the top as they're selecting their most important reasons. We would take, if somebody selected 3, the survey in this first question of choose all of the reasons, if somebody selected 3, the survey would then automatically populate those 3 into their next question. So it was personalized and say, okay, of these 3 that you selected, which was your top reason? What was your most important reason? And that's where we get these. So from their most important reasons, 4 rise to the top. I didn't want a baby. Health-related concerns for the fetus. It wasn't the right time for a baby, and partner-related reasons. If these seem a little vague to you or overlapping, they seem that way to me too. And the qualitative data doesn't totally clear it up. The information we got from their interviews doesn't totally clear it up, but we'll see what we can do with it. So just to compare between the general population and the Jewish population, the most important reasons, the most common, most important reasons that US women had abortions are N is 161 compared to the general US population. So what was interesting is that of those top 4 reasons that Jewish women chose, 3 of them overlapped as the top 4 reasons why US women were having abortions. So the 3 out of 4 that overlapped were partner-related reasons, timing, and not wanting a baby. For US women, the other most popular reason was can't afford a child. For Jewish women surveyed, not being able to afford a child did not rank among the top 4 most common important reasons for having an abortion. Financially, not being financially prepared was not what Jewish women were concerned about when they had an abortion. Instead, it was health-related concerns for the fetus. Again, this might mean that we've oversampled among people who've had abortions for medical reasons, or it might mean that financial considerations are not factoring into the reasons why US women are having abortions. And maybe we're oversampling among a wealthier Jewish population. All of that remains to be seen. But those are some of the these are some of the trends that we're seeing. So when compared, just under 15% of Jewish women said partner-related reasons compared to about 7 or 8% of the general US population. About 22% of Jewish women said it wasn't the right time, compared to 25% of the general US population. Here's that discrepancy in health-related concerns. You see Jewish women have this at 27%, and the general US population puts this only at 3%. And I didn't want a baby. 14% of our sample says I didn't want a baby as their #1 reason, compared to about 19% of the general US population. So I think this is really interesting that among the top reasons why Jewish women in our sample are having abortions, 3 out of 4 of them are overlapping with the general US population, and which indicates to me that Jewish women are very much like general US population in terms of their abortion reasons. And the health-related concerns, I would love to hear your thoughts about why we think health-related concerns are more. Okay. I'll just show you a few of these, we asked people in the interviews what they meant by selecting partner-related reasons or health of the fetus. And so these little quotes from them help us understand a little bit better what they meant by it. And I'll read these for 5 minutes maybe, and then we'll take some questions and comments. This is the last part of the survey, so of the my presentation. So, okay, so partner-related reasons. A 31-year-old secular Jew spoke about not being prepared financially and emotionally to raise 3 young children by myself because she was about to get divorced. A 25-year-old Reform Jew said, I wasn't sure I wanted a child, didn't want to have a child with this person who wasn't ready to have a job, let alone a child. A 24-year-old Reform Jew told us her partner was abusive and didn't think she should have been pregnant, and he pressured her into having the abortion. They were not married and thought it would be embarrassing for his family if she was pregnant. Another 33-year-old Reform Jew talked about her husband's mental health issues, being diagnosed with bipolar, contemplating suicide. She thought that having another child would be too stressful. She considered that her abortion would save her husband's life. So, and that one is kind of really interesting to me because we don't often ask when we think about partner-related reasons. I think we're often thinking about those first 3 examples. And when we think about maternal health, we're not thinking about parental health more broadly, but a male partner's health might also be a significant factor in having an abortion, but it's not something we ask about. What did people mean by health of the fetus? Here, people shared with us the various conditions that their fetuses had been diagnosed with. A lot of these were very tragic and had been These were very much wanted pregnancies, and diagnoses often came well into the second trimester, having to make challenging decisions when a fetus might not survive to full term, or when they didn't actually have all the information they needed, but they needed to make a decision. And so they describe a few of the kind of conditions that their future child might have, and decided that it wasn't the right thing for them. I'll point in particular to this 35-year-old Orthodox Jew who not just listed, she didn't only list the particular conditions that her fetus was diagnosed with, but she also spoke about the concerns she had for her living child. She thought that there would be a huge effect on his childhood and the life experiences that he would have with a severely disabled child, a sibling. Many timing was another one of among the 4 top reasons that Jewish women had an abortion. So, and by timing, they meant a lot of different things, which is really fascinating. So I picked a few that resembled the diversity of meaning of timing for people. So you have one 29-year-old who was raised conservative, who said, I had just lost my job. I had been dating the father for only a few weeks. I didn't know if I had to move or where and when I'd be working. Basically, she had just so many unknowns in her life. It wasn't the right time to have a child. We had several who were full-time college students at the time of their abortions, and knew that they wanted children eventually, just not right now. So that's this one, 21, who's Reform. A single woman in a casual relationship who was not prepared, 32, when she had the abortion. This one, my husband and I were both students in graduate school, couldn't take on the responsibility without compromising our study. This was very popular as a reason, and reflects, remember, that kind of higher percentage of people who were married at the time of their abortion. Okay, and here, this one, you can't be in the Orthodox world not married and pregnant. She said she was 38 and Orthodox, not married, divorced, and pregnant. And she knew that this, for her, was just not the right time. Therefore, it was contrary to her, how could she be an Orthodox Jew in her culture, her social group, and be pregnant and not married, that would be very, very hard. Okay. And the last category was just didn't want a baby. We'll see also that there's some overlapping with the other categories. And so here, what did people mean when they said didn't want a baby? One person said, 30-year-old Reform. She said, I was afraid of physical risks to my body, as well as risks of damage to my emotions, finances, and every other aspects of life. Housing, relationship, job. She also had another child, so she was concerned about how this child would affect the attention she was able to give to her current child. She also had an abuser that she didn't want to anger, therefore she didn't want a baby. Another college student who told us, being a first semester freshman in college when I got pregnant, and having a baby was not even on my radar of possibilities. I was still basically a child. She told us all of the other reasons I selected added up to the fact that I did not want a baby at the time. Now, she could have selected timing, but for her, didn't want a baby was a more apt category. If I were to get pregnant now, I probably would still get an abortion for several of the other reasons selected, but not because I categorically do not want a child at the moment. We had a lot of responses that were just, I never wanted to be a mom, or I didn't want to have children. People saying, I know I didn't want any children. So they were able to get an abortion, and we're very grateful for it. And then the final description I have here is somebody who's 38 and Reform, and she said, or 38 at the time of her abortion, and she said, I had never planned or wanted a third child. I was on birth control. We would have had to make major life changes I did not want to make, and it would have been a financial struggle in the city where they lived. So I found this one was also really important to kind of highlight, because for several reasons. One, there is a kind of live question that we've been thinking about a lot. what they call callously in the field as an oopsie baby. You're kind of like your third after you've already had your children and you get pregnant maybe later when you're not planning on getting pregnant. And one of the hypotheses that a colleague of mine has is that Jewish women are more likely to not terminate an oopsie baby than their non-Jewish counterparts. And of course, we don't have enough data on this, but this was an interesting sample of somebody who did terminate that third child that she did not want. She had other children. She was on birth control, not planning on having any more. Okay. I'm going to stop there. I've shared a lot, and I'm happy to share certain slides again if folks have more questions, but what are your reactions? What are you surprised by? What are the questions you still have? Yeah, Alvin, when are you get us started? You have your hand up. Yeah.
Yes. So I had a question related to the particular slide that showed vast difference between Jewish women having abortion because of health of the child to the outside world, to the other people. And my thinking is we have to, almost all of us, get tested for certain hereditary birth conditions before we get married as Jews, if we're marrying another Jew. And that's not true for the rest of the population you're looking at. And so because of that, we're very keen to what might be certain genetic risks that the child might have. So has that been teased out to see how many of these Jewish women actually were tested, or their partners were tested as well?
That's a great question. Right. So we're not asking how many of them go through the genetic testing. And you know what we haven't done though? I have so much to say about this. But I'm there. I need to look into kind of when the Jewish community started, and two things. When the Jewish community started doing standardized testing on Jews when they get married or, you know, as Jewish adults, but also when Jews started getting those tests from their doctors. In other words, when they created the kind of Jewish panel of genetic diseases that were being tested for, it could be that we have a sample that leans heavier towards kind of that genetic testing. But the other thing is that if Jews are getting the genetic testing, then they wouldn't be getting abortions for those reasons, because they would already know that those things are possible. Now, then you have this other timeline of when are people more often more likely to use in vitro fertilization and test those embryos for the genetic disorders that they might be prone for. So these are all kind of great follow-up questions to this first question. But then the last thing I'll say is that a lot of the health-related concerns for fetus that folks listed are things that are not tested for on that genetic panel. Now, that could mean that in other words, if they're developmental anomalies, then they're not going to be tested for in the genetic panel. It could mean that Jews are more likely when they marry other Jews to have some kind of genetic disorder nonetheless, or developmental disorder nonetheless. It could mean that we oversampled. All of these things are possible. Yes, there are so many things. Amy, yeah.
One reason I wanted to attend tonight was because I was a bit taken aback that you would think that Jewish women would have abortions for different reasons from most American women. So I'm curious, why did you think that would be so? And is your research supporting your whatever thesis it is that you put out there that somehow differentiates Jews from other Americans?
Great. Yeah, that's a great question. Okay, so there were two things motivating the reasons question. One was income. Jews in general have a higher household income than the general US population. And so we assumed that in as much as income is related to abortion decisions, that Jews would be having abortions for different reasons. And at least that financial considerations wouldn't play into Jews' abortion decisions in the way that they play into the general US population. And even, and my sample, again, not representative of all Jews, but we are seeing in our sample that financial considerations are not among the top 4 reasons that people are having, that Jews are having abortions in this sample. So that at least is playing out. But I was also playing with or thinking about this, what is often assumed about Jews. And actually, I heard this so much in my interviews. Here's how the interview would go. It would start with, we'd do the pleasantries. You want to participate? Yes, yes, yes. Okay. And then I'd say, tell me your abortion story. And so many of my interviews would start like this. I want you to know I was using contraception at the time that I got pregnant. And we'd go through the whole story, and then I'd ask, why is it so important? Why did you start your abortion story by telling me that you were using contraception? And they would say, because I want you to know I was being responsible. Now, we have a whole narrative about women in the US and their responsibility about contraception. And if only people used contraception, then we wouldn't need abortions. And, and irresponsible women are getting abortions, that whole trope. I had a hunch that Jewish women either were more likely to use contraception or were more likely to think of themselves as responsible women who were not having abortions. And of course, part of what we're seeing is that those reasons, those kind of, I wasn't ready for a baby, I was using contraception, is just as popular among Jewish women as they are among the general US population. So I'm still thinking about how Jewish women think of themselves as, how we think of ourselves as responsible vis-a-vis reproduction and what that means. So those are some of the motivations for looking at reasons. Other questions, observations, things that were surprising? Anything surprising? Anything you want to know more about? Yeah, Andy.
Can you talk a little bit more about how you recruited the people who participated? So I'm used to a survey where we're considering a response rate. Is the 170 out of how many people that were asked to participate, that kind of thing?
Yeah, we don't have that response rate because of the way we circulated the survey was all through kind of like we sent it out to I'll bring up that slide again just so I can show you how many places sent it out. Okay. So the Jewish Women's Archive sent it out to their listserv. Rising Tide Mikvah Network, which is a network of over 400 mikvah staff folks affiliated with the Boston mikvah, but located all over the United States, sent it out among their mikvahs, and among all of their, anybody who had immersed in one of their mikvahs received the survey. Hillel International sent it out to all of the Hillels that then, I don't even know which ones sent it out to their constituents. Things like that. It went out on various rabbinic networks for people to either fill out themselves or to send to congregants. And we didn't get feedback about, we knew when they sent it out, but we didn't get feedback about how many people received the survey. The other thing, and that is one of the limitations of the survey. And here the problem is we don't know what the total is. We don't know what the total number of Jewish women who've had abortions is, right? We know that in the United States, there are approximately 1 million women who have abortions every year. I don't know how many of those are Jewish women. So that's part of the problem in trying to think about how representative this is of the larger population, and why what we're hoping to find here is some of the trends that we're seeing that will then be interesting to somebody who wants to launch a bigger study or help us launch a bigger study, really. And I think it could be possible to launch a bigger study with the help of some of these larger organizations that are already asking questions about income and how many children you have and age and education and Jewish identity and things like that, to find a subset of that group that's had an abortion would be really interesting. So maybe in the next Pew survey, you'll see a question about abortion, and then we'll know the percentage of Jewish women who've had abortions, really. Yes, Mom.
Hi.
Hi.
I have a question about, did the women consult anyone else before they made the decisions? Was there a question about, who did you speak to? Did you speak to your mother? Did you speak to your friends or your own rabbi? I mean, who did they do that? And was that important? And did that, did that affect their choice?
Great question. Okay, so we asked 2 questions in the survey, and then there's a question that we ask in the interviews. So in the survey, we ask, did you consult with a rabbi or some kind of religious leader, a rabbi, an educator, a cantor, or something like this? And we list a whole bunch of different options. The vast majority said no. Even among the Orthodox participants, they said no, which from my other research is not terribly surprising. Then we also ask a question, who did you tell about the abortion afterwards? And this indicates, this has been used in research about shame and abortion. If people are more likely to tell others about their abortion afterwards, then it indicates they likely don't feel a great deal of shame about it, or stigma. If they felt a lot of that people would stigmatize them, they wouldn't tell them. And we asked things like, did you tell your Jewish friends? Did you tell your non-Jewish friends? People we found were more likely to tell their Jewish friends about their abortion than their non-Jewish friends, which is interesting to us too, about who they think would stigmatize them or shame them as a result of the abortion. Then in the interviews, we ask, how did you come to the decision to terminate? And most of them include a conversation with often their partner, sometimes their mothers, although there's a bit of a generational difference here. So I found, and I need to look more closely at this, but in the interviews that I've done among the women who had abortions in the 70s and 80s, they were less likely to discuss them with their moms, I found. Whereas women who've had abortions in the 2000s are more likely to share them, to discuss with their moms ahead of time. Maybe that's age, maybe that's generational. I mean, because in the 70s, 80s, you have women having abortions in the, second wave feminist women having abortions post-Roe, and their moms are all pre-Roe, pre-second wave feminism. So there might have been, what they say is that they were much more afraid of their moms finding out that they had an abortion than they were later on. The women more recently are more likely to tell their mothers that they had an abortion or to talk about it ahead of time. Does that resonate? Does that make sense?
Yes, no, it certainly resonates. I mean, I can remember being a young woman in the late 60s, early 70s, and the thought of my getting pregnant and what was I going to tell my mother,
right,
was like, we just, I didn't even know how I would approach it. It was a terrifying thought, at least in my experience. Not every woman has that
right. And
at least mine.
Yeah, and what I'm saying is I think that resonates. Like I think of the women from your generation that I've spoken to, I hear similar things. And by the way, there's something else attached to it. It's not just should I get the abortion, it's my mother will find out that I had sex. And I'm not married. And that was something that I am seeing this really important difference among Jewish women that I'm speaking to, that they feel more shame or stigma about their premarital sex than they do about the abortion itself, which is another thing that we're trying to unpack. So it was kind of like, once I got pregnant, it was obvious I was going to have the abortion, but and that was obviously the right decision, and everybody would agree that that was the right decision. But I was embarrassed about the abortion because it meant that people would know that I had sex, and that's interesting, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
I do have one more question, if you don't mind.
Nobody else, does anybody else have a question?
Okay, so my question is, recently, this past week with the young woman from Texas, they kept interviewing her, and it was all about her. And yet she was married. She did have other children.
Yeah.
I wonder whether or not, why aren't we interviewing men? Why aren't we looking at men in this whole discussion? It seems to me that if alongside of her, her husband stood with her and said, you guys are all crazy, okay, and it's none of your business what my wife and I do, that it would resonate more with the outside community. But men are not considered part of this, and I think that is something that we miss. Okay.
Yeah. No, I agree. I mean, I think it would be very powerful to hear from men, particularly Kate Cox, I think is her name. I mean, her life was in danger. I mean, if she were to die, he would be left with young children to take care of by
Right.
himself. And it would be important to hear from him. So that's, I will say though, the Washington Post did wonderful reporting almost a year ago, I think, following a young couple in Texas that got pregnant. They were in high school, and they just missed in 2021 after the ban, Texas instituted their ban. And the Washington Post followed them for a year and did several reports about them, interviewing both and finding how both of them were affected by not being able to get the abortion. And both of their lives have really been cut short. So that is just, you're right, that the majority of the reporting is about women and doesn't encounter men. This is a difference. This is some important reporting that I totally recommend everybody look into, because looking into how it affects his life as well is really important. Or the restrictions affect his life as well is really important. And the other thing I'll say is I feel a tiny nudge to be, which is, Michal, why aren't you interviewing men as part of the study? And I think you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And when I'm able to create a Jewish center for abortion research, men will be part of the story. Men are also part of the story on all sorts of reproductive experiences, miscarriage, infertility, all of those things. I'll share a little bit. I was also doing research on rabbis for repro. In other words, rabbis who have signed a pledge to support reproductive rights. And many of them are men and talk about their wives' reproductive experiences as influencing their attitudes towards abortion. That seeing their wife go through miscarriages or fertility treatments or abortions has made them more supportive of abortion itself. So men are, part of that piece of research, but you're right, they're not in this, and they should be. Yeah, somebody, I need a research team, I need more researchers.
Thanks.
Okay. I could take one more question before we wrap up.
Well, if nobody else has one, I have one.
Great.
Going forward, what's the plan, and how does one incorporate medical abortion, especially since we're also seeing that come under threat?
You mean medication abortion?
I'm sorry, medication, yes.
Great. Okay. Yeah. So medication abortion accounts for at least 50% of the abortions we now see in this country, although it was only really popularized in the US after in the 21st century. That's what we call this century, in the 21st century. So All of the people who've had abortions prior to the year 2000 in our survey did not have medication abortions. More of them have them now in more recent sample. And I could bring data next time about we do ask about how the procedure that you got, the procedure for the abortion that you had. So I can share that
Well,
next time.
if I can interrupt,
Yeah.
I'm always curious. I don't see any information if being able to have a medication abortion, which is more private than having to go to a facility, if that has made a difference.
Yeah, this is one of the questions that's very live today, because actually, so for a long time, until COVID really, people still needed to go to a facility to get the medication. Only with COVID did we see in the US an increase of people really doing self-managed abortion. And that meant that they were buying pills online and having them shipped to them privately. They didn't need to go into a doctor's office. They could consult with a doctor online, and that was much more private. And we do have, I'll try to remember to bring some of that data for next time if it's relevant. There is some larger data on that. That reveals that people very much appreciate the privacy that they're granted from self-managed abortion from these medication pills. Yeah, and what we don't know, unfortunately, from that data, because we don't know really the numbers, because a lot of people are afraid to report. A lot of the people we suspect who are self-managing abortion, like that, ordering pills online and having them shipped to their house, are living in states where abortion is illegal, or the bans are very strict. And the bans have not fully made clear whether somebody can terminate using a self-managed method like ordering pills online. So people are afraid to even disclose that they've had abortions in that way. And all of the abortion data that we have collected already about the general US population is collected from abortion providers. So if people are managing their abortions at home by ordering pills, we don't really have a way of getting in touch with them. And they may not want to be reached. So yeah, all of those things are happening. So there's some indication that it is definitely a preferred method by people who want privacy. And we don't have great data on it because those folks are hard to reach. And sometimes that's by design. Does that answer the question, Amy?
It does. Thank you.
Okay, great. Okay. So thanks, everybody. I think we're out of time. I was really glad to share with you. Our next session is, when is it? Wednesday, January 24th at 7 p.m. Thank you. And that one, we're going to be looking at how do differences in Jewish affiliation affect women's abortion experiences. So